Hello everyone, welcome back to Amy's Bookshelf. Today we're going to talk about Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. So after a very tight vote between David Copperfield and Great Expectations, I decided to go with Great Expectations because honestly, time constraints for making this video and getting it out before Christmas with all of my work schedule and everything else. So this is one I went with and I really loved it. I thought it was awesome. I gave it 4 stars and I am really excited to talk about it with you. So in Great Expectations, we're following Pip, who is living with his sister, and we don't know her name. She's just called Mrs. Joe, and his brother-in-law, Joe, who is a blacksmith. And the book really follows Pip as he's growing up. This is not really much more of a plot-driven book. It's much more of a character-driven book. And it's first-person perspective, which I normally don't like, but I really enjoyed in this book. And it follows Pip as he goes from being a young boy in this home where it's very abusive. So you do see child abuse mentioned, not really displayed, but obviously this is Victorian England, so there's a lot of hard times, but I do want to mention that. And it is something that he is experiencing a lot of hardship at this point, and he grows from living with this difficulty in his home life with his sister and her husband. His sister's very abusive, as we hear words about, and his brother-in-law is very kind and very caring. Joe is very much the father figure in Pip's life and someone who he relies on for care and compassion and basically parenting in his world. Then we see at the very beginning Pip in a graveyard scene where someone comes up to him and terrifies him. It is very interesting, and I don't know how much more I want to say. I walked in pretty blind, and I'm very thankful that I did. This book really follows a lot of Pip's life as he's going from being a young boy and he's struggling with what he is in this world and what he wants to achieve in this world. I think this title is really important too because it follows what Pip expects of himself and expects of this world and expects of others. And it's all of these great expectations. And then slowly you realize that maybe what expectations are should not be there, and he should expect less of things, or he should expect different things. And maybe what we expect of ourselves or expect of others isn't reality. And I think that that's what the kind of the lesson of the book was, or something that I pulled out of the book was. So I think this was a really interesting book about becoming into your own person and coming into these different characters and really following what your path is in a very interesting way and time. This one also follows a lot of themes about self-improvement and, becoming into your own character and how you develop your own character. What kind of things do you do that really set yourself apart, and how do you care about yourself? So I thought this was a really interesting book for that. I really liked Pip as a character and how he looked at the world. And I think that's really important when you're reading a first-person book, because I can't stand it when I'm reading a first-person perspective or first POV, and I can't stand it when I hate the person whose head I'm in. And I've read a couple books like that, but this one I really didn't mind. I really loved Pip as a person, and I loved how he thought things through. And I think that when you really understand that you're first of all seeing this boy as a young boy, and as you're seeing him grow up, you really can see his maturity come through. And I really enjoyed those perspectives. You're also seeing him interact with many people in the world. You're seeing him interact with his sister and her husband. You're seeing him interact with the people in his town. You're seeing him interact with the guardian down the line. And you're seeing him interact with different people who have positive and negative impacts on his life. And all of those people, he has a way to impact them. He can negatively or positively impact them back. And I think it's really interesting to see how he does that. So that was my spoiler-free section of this, and I'm going to go into spoilers now, and I hope you check this one out if you haven't done so already. So to start this off, I was spoiled. I want to say that. I was spoiled by my audiobook that I was starting to listen to, and it told me right away that, by the way, the convict is actually Pip's guardian and not, or Pip's benefactor and not Miss Havisham, and I was very disappointed because then I knew from the beginning who was actually his benefactor. But I felt like that was interesting because I was able to see that the convict was actually someone who Pip was able to impact positively from the beginning. And Pip has an interesting way of interacting with people. He has a way of dealing with or helping characters who are struggling. And I think he's very empathetic. He is able to see people in need and see people who are struggling and help them out. And I don't know how else to say it. Like he sees Miss Havisham, who is very lonely and is struggling in later in life, and he knows that she caused all of his struggle. He knows that she's the one who created his strife and his broken heart, and yet he still comforts her. He's also later the one who is like, you need to give money to my friend. And he is the one who says to makes Miss Havisham give money to Herbert. And therefore she does. Or not to Herbert, for the pockets. And he does because he wants to positively impact his friends' lives, even in spite of all of these little hiccups that are going to be caused by for him. I think he is really empathetic and really helpful to those around him. He also is young. He also, I think, is brilliantly shown in this as being someone who is self-absorbed, because everyone is as they're growing and even as they're older. But then also someone who can see, oh, I made a mistake there, and trying to correct it. He is so cruel at times to Joe and Biddy because he is not aware, and then later trying to fix it. And I think that was so prominent when he got sick and he had those debts to pay, and Joe paid them all, and he was suddenly clear on what he needed to do and how he could have just walked away, but he was so intent on paying them back. And I also loved, side note, that Joe and Biddy got together because they needed happiness in their lives, and Joe deserved someone happy after being with an abusive wife. And I also really loved the fact that this book showed a man who was in an abusive relationship, and it showed that aspect. It wasn't just a man who was an abuser. Like a man was a victim in an abusive relationship. I thought that was really powerful in this too. Obviously it didn't go into details, but I felt like that was really important. And it's something that's really, really kind of side noted, but it is something that's mentioned in here. I felt like that was an awesome thing to see, as there are those relationships in the world. So that was just a little side note. Another thing I noticed was a lot of the duality. And I feel like I notice this a lot in books now, a duality of things. So, you know, how Pip at the beginning is in the graveyard, and then Pip at the end taking young Pip to the graveyard. So Joe's son, Joe and Biddy's son. And then I also really noticed the different kind of characters, and how there was the convicts, and there was the characters who kept popping up. I noticed that it was the duality of the scene from the beginning where they're chasing the two convicts, to the scene at the end where the two convicts were in the water again. It was like I was rereading that scene again, and I was like, wait a second, did my ebook go back? Because I was reading it in ebook form as well as audiobook form, and it was like, no, it didn't. And so it was just interesting to see that duality. And then I also noticed how, and I might be pulling a real stretch, like a real thin stretch here, but I noticed that Estella's name is Estella, and that's the name of a star, or that means like star in some language. And I'm like, is that like a leading sign? Like she's leading Pip astray, but she's never actually going to be there for him. I just was wondering. That was something I noticed. But speaking of Estella, I thought that it was really interesting that she and Pip were both orphans, and both she and Pip were raised by people who were not birth parents. Although Pip was raised partially by someone who is blood relative, so his sister. However, she was very harsh and abusive. And the two people who technically raised them, being Miss Havisham and Joe, treated them very differently. So Joe raised Pip to be very kind and very aware and very cautious, not very cautious, but he was very open-hearted. And yet Miss Havisham created a manipulative, man-hating, someone who would enter into abusive marriage in Estella. And I thought that was very, very sad and very interesting how that would work out. Because as much as I was reading this, I noticed how Stella was being molded into this from the beginning. And I'm sure everyone who's ever read Great Expectations sees this, but it broke my heart because as much as we see that, and even the opening scene with Miss Havisham where she's half dressed and she has half things done, everything was half in the room. It was just so interesting to me that everything was half. I really want to read it actually because it was just so interesting to me. She was dressed in rich materials, satins and lace and silks, all in white. Her shoes were white and she had on a long white veil dependent from her hair. And she had bridal flowers in her hair, but her hair was white. Some bright jewels sparkled on her neck and her hands, and some other jewels really sparkling on the tables. Dresses less splendid than the dress she wore, and half-packed trunks all were scattered about. She had not quite finished dressing, but she had on one shoe. The other was on the table near her hand. Her veil was but half arranged, and her watch and the chain were not put on, and some lace for her bosom lay on the trinkets, and both her handkerchief and gloves and some flowers and the prayer book all confusingly heaped about the looking glass. So it just was interesting to me that half these things were done. Like she was wearing half of her shoes. She was like, half the trunk was packed. It was just half and half and half. So it was like she was living half of her life. And I mean, I'm sure everyone else, like I said, has noticed this about Great Expectations. But we all know that, you know, the clock is stopped. But her life is half done. She stopped her life at halfway. She's not even half finished dressed. Like she's not half. She's half of a woman, and she's creating Estella to be half of a woman too. And when Estella gets married, she's becoming half of a woman too. She's half of herself is going into that marriage. She's keeping her heart out of that marriage completely. And then when she gets in that marriage, she's going to be abused. She's going to be treated horribly. And it's just a sad thing to see how Miss Havisham doesn't realize what she's doing, but at the same time she does. It was an interesting paradox. And as soon as I read that about the half, I was like, she has stopped her life halfway and she's refusing to move on. So it was just, yeah. Another character I really liked was Jaggers. I think that he really tied so many people together. He was Miss Havisham's lawyer. He was the guardian for Pip while Magswitch was out of the country, and while Magswitch was doing all he could to send Pip money, and while trying to create a gentleman out of Pip. And Jaggers was such an interesting, complex character. He was a lawyer, and yet he kind of seems like a criminal at times. I don't know. He just felt really harsh and really interesting to me. I really enjoyed reading his scenes because he just felt like a man of action. And then the fact that he knew this criminal and was doing the bidding of a criminal, of a convict for Pip, I thought that was an interesting aspect as well. So I really liked how Jaggers was in the story and how he kind of moved things along and how he really was what took stories from point A to point B to point C. And I think that that's really an interesting point of this because this book really didn't have much of a plot, except for the fact that we followed Pip around. We didn't really have much of a plot. We just followed Pip from, his point to the cemetery, from his point to the house, from that point on to London, and from that point on to wherever else he went. And I think Jaggers really moved us through those stages. So I think that was interesting. I don't think I have anything else to say about this novel in particular, but I do want to say that because of this, I have re-fallen in love with Charles Dickens' writing. And I think I have realized that Dickens isn't just for Christmas for me. I want to read more of Dickens throughout the year. I really enjoyed how he wrote the story, and I really enjoyed how the writing style flowed. I think it was a really easy way to pick up this book. I was really engaged with the mystery and the whodunit and the different elements of this pace. I'm okay with a slow-paced book as long as I'm engaged with the characters. And I also really enjoyed this element of mystery and of who is it going to be, where is it going to go, what's Pip going to do next? And all of these things, I really enjoyed how Charles Dickens really writes this story together and cohesively puts it all together, and I did not mind the coincidences. I think that was okay in this because it just flowed so well, and the duality of it is so true to this book. It's just so cohesive, and I think it really flows. So please let me know down below in the comments if you've read Great Expectations or if you're planning to. I would also love to know if there's another Charles Dickens that you recommend I pick up. I am still going to be reading David Copperfield eventually because I am still very interested in reading that, as there was such a close tie between this one and David Copperfield. But I will be reading Vanity Fair in January, so I don't think I have time for David Copperfield then. I will hopefully be reading it though in 2021. So I will be keeping my eyes open for that opportunity. So please let me know down below though which one I should check out of Charles Dickens though soon. And please let me know if you have read this one. Who's your favorite character? What's your favorite part of this book? I'd love to chat Great Expectations down below in the comments. Please like this video if you enjoyed it and subscribe if you are new here. Thank you so much for watching. Bye for now.